is a very quick method that you can use for anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be for analyzing games. I'm using it to analyze the game, but it can be for anything. It can be any kind of experience, thing that has happened. So if you can assess how you've worked together as a team on a project. You can do retrospectives in the middle of the project, during the project, to see how things are going and how you need to improve how you work together. You can use it for some kind of amusement park thing. You can use it for anything. How was your experience at this place? How was this immersive experience? How was this game? Any kind of thing. How your team's working together, how a project's going. So you break it down into roses, thorns, and buds. And so one of the reasons that I like to use Post-its for this is that it keeps the comments very short and to the point. So it's not a time to write a dissertation, but it's not a time to write a long report. This is a quick, that's the keyword here, quick way to put down your thoughts, your critical thinking thoughts about this experience. Because what you will do with this is you will use this later for other things. So, and I'm thinking that maybe that's something that I start doing at the end of each genre. So what I do is I play a genre of games. I started with tabletop RPGs, tabletop card games as a genre, and I went through some 2D games, and then I played some VR games to see how they had translated it into XR. And then I'm going to do an overall kind of rose, thorn, bud exercise on as a genre of these are the things that were good and bad that I saw as a trend, and this is what we need to think about if we're translating things into XR tabletop RPGs and card games. And so now we're working on platformers, so we're going to do that same thing. And so by having these boards, and you'll see one here, as I'm going to do it live with you. This is another way that we're gaining experience together by doing together, participating in the chat, or asynchronously through YouTube, is that we're going to do this together. What did you see? What did you think went well? What was a highlight? What did you like about it? Because I'm going to be doing it from my perspective, but maybe you saw something I didn't. Same thing with thorns. What didn't go well? What was a low point? What did you not like? And then buds, what opportunities do you see for improvement? What would you do differently next time? What questions do you have? And also, this would also be where you do any kind of next steps or follow-ups. Follow-ups like a potential bug, because there's been a couple of times where I've come across potential bugs. So I would write in a thorn, this might be a bug. This is what's happening. And then I talked more about bug reporting in Nobody Saves the World when I was playing through that one a few weeks ago. So if you want to watch that one again, bug reporting, this is, you can go check that out. But, so a next step would be to follow up and report that, do all the necessary things to report that bug. That would be listed in your buds as things to do. So one thing that we tend to do that's unfortunate is we only focus on the things that are wrong, but we also want to focus on the things that went well, because we don't want to take those things away. We want to remember this actually is a good thing. How can we fix the problem that we're trying to fix without taking that away, without taking away the good things? So we want to list the good things. These are things we want to keep. These are things that are working well. And so having that list reminds us, this is what makes a good experience. Because we do want to know that. We don't want to know just what makes a bad one. We want to know what makes a good one. Because that's the ultimate goal here, is to make a good one. And then the thorns, again, are your concise list of things that are an issue. And then the buds are next steps. It's a quick, concise list. Things that are going well, things that are not going well. What are our next steps? And So when we have these in a very concise format like this, as opposed to a report, this written out report that is our habit to do, these long reports, is when we need to go and do a bigger thing, because what Rose Thorn Bud is good for is for quick analysis that we can go back and synthesize later into a much bigger thing. And so when we skip that step and we go to the detail long report immediately, what's that doing is that's going to make it harder for us to quickly see the good things, quickly see the bad things as we're making a bigger thing. And so I'm thinking that what I should do, and this will be a new thing, once we're done playing this genre of platformers, which will be in a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, I don't remember. I'm not going to be streaming on the 31st because I have a workshop that I'm doing that day, so I won't be able to stream that day. But about a month, I think, we'll be done with platformers, and then I'll probably do a stream where I'm just creating an overall assessment of platformers from what we've learned, based on what we've learned. So then I would recommend you that you pay attention to that stream, because then you're going to learn how do we start creating reports on this stuff. How do we start writing these reports? And so I think that would be very beneficial for you to watch as well, as a part of this exercise, to help you gain experience. So let's do the one for today, now that I've gotten kind of off subject, but not off subject. Okay, so what are the things that went well? Music creates an adventurous atmosphere. And I'm also doing it in current tense, present tense, because this is the present tense. It's like a mindset that I like keeping. I don't think that it's required that you do it this way, but it helps me to remember this is the current state. This is what's presently happening with this thing. It hasn't been fixed. It hasn't changed. This is current state. And so I think we can see a change history somewhere in here as well. Yeah, history. So we can see when we did things. So we can see when was the current state, or we can just put a date on here so we know when was the current state of this. If we need to do that for record keeping, good idea to do that. But I like to just, so I remind myself, this is the current state of this thing as it is right now. And it also feels more active. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. This is the active present tense. So the environment design, the lighting, sound effects that you can hear in the background, those sound effects, the sounds of nature. Nature seems to be a very big part of this game, as part of that story that's being told here, that we probably see more of as we play the game, why nature is such a big aspect of this. Maybe there's a story there. But thinking about those things, everything working together, all of the sound, all of the NPC behaviors, all of the everything works together cohesively to create this story and this experience. And when something is off, you notice, even though you don't always notice what it is that's off, you do notice, and that can break that narrative dream, that can break you out of that immersion. And so paying attention to those things is very important, and they have done a very good job of doing that, of using all of those things to work together to create the mood of the game, the tone and the mood of the game. And they don't have to be complete sentences either. I don't use complete sentences, I just get the key points out, short and concise again, so that we can easily scan it and see, so that when we need to review later, when we need to come back and check on things, or write as something bigger, a report later, whatever, we can do that quickly without having to read a dissertation. It is our human nature not to want to read all of that, so why are we doing that? Why are we making it hard for ourselves? But when we are communicating, that's just for us. So when we're communicating with a client or a stakeholder or some kind of audience, investors, whatever, we do want to take the time to be more cohesive and more clear on what it is we're saying. But even in that case, we want it to be concise and to the point. We don't want to ramble. We want to be very clear and very concise and explain the whys. It's important to explain the whys when you get to that point, and we'll go over that once we're done with platformers. I'll do an example of that so that you can see what that's like. So environment, design, lighting, mood, these are good things that we're focusing on right now. The character I like the character designs and the thought that was so. First of all, the character designs, they're very well done. I don't know what else to say about that. That's an animation that matches their personality. They've thought about that. Their rigging matches. Their rigging matches their personality. Those are things that you have to, and it's much more important in XR, in VR specifically, and I'll make a note of that to share that resource as well. Npc behaviors are very important in VR, much more so than in 2D games, because there were some weird things that was happening with the animations when they would jump and so forth, and it would kind of freeze in a weird position. That's fine and that's quirky in 2D game, but in VR, it's much more noticeable, much more important, and because you get into that uncanny valley when you're in VR, because it's lifelike and you're embodied in this game, and so you're convinced that these things around you are more real than you would in a 2D game. You're more immersed than you would be in a 2D game, so psychologically, even though you know this is an NPC, it's not real, you still expect it to behave like a real person, if it's a person, or a anthropomorphic representation of a sentient being. You would expect it to behave a certain way. And those were all big words, sorry. But you notice when things are off. You notice when the behaviors aren't the same, and I talked about this last week as well. You want them to behave like they would in real life, and you notice when it doesn't. Like if the NPC is talking to you but they're not looking at you, that psychologically gives you the sense that you're being ignored. And so fine, in a 2D game, it's not as big a deal. It's more of a delight when they do look at you in a 2D game, because they took the time to think about that. But in a VR experience, where you're looking at them and you're talking to them, but they're not looking at you, that gives you this sense of being ignored and of being minimized. And if you're Now, unless you're doing an empathy video where you're putting yourself in someone's shoes that is minimized and that is ignored, then if you're doing that, then yeah, go ahead and let the NPC ignore them. But if that's not the intent, if it's just you want to pay attention to that, what it is that the NPC behaviors are giving off, because it matters much more in VR. So character design, rigging, the abilities, the character abilities, work together to solve the puzzles and make it through the game. I like how they work together. It's necessary to work together. You can't solve everything with just one character, because like we saw, we couldn't fight with you can shoot things from a distance with the entrepreneur, I think is what she called herself, but the wizard, I didn't know of any abilities that the wizard could use to fight, but the wizard could do other cool things like levitating and so forth. But I was trying to levitate the enemies, but I wasn't able to, and he was taking too much damage, so I quickly switched him to the knight, and the knight was able to fight. And the knight was able to take more damage because of the armor and the shield. So they had to work together to get through it, and that is a good way of learning teamwork and using teamwork to solve problems. And it would be, and I'll probably do another series in the future, but I need other people to help with it, is the multiplayer things, the co-op things, but I need other people to help with that. So that is, it'll be coming, but I have to figure the logistics out for that, so that other people can help. And maybe sometimes that'll be like a patron benefit or something for people who donate or who become a patron. Maybe that's a benefit that they get in the future. I'm still working on benefits for, like, what are things that I can do to make it more worthwhile for you as patrons, as people who help support this effort. What are some of those things? Maybe some of those things are, hey, you have exclusive access to helping me with the stream live on air to play these multiplayer, and actually real-time speaking with me doing these things together. And maybe that's a benefit that it happens in the future. That is something that I am wanting to happen once we get to a certain point. So I am working on thinking about more benefits for becoming patron besides just access to content. What are some other fun things that we can do that will benefit you as patrons? So promoting teamwork, working together, character abilities work together, and they also add things to the environment. They add environmental hints. So that was one of they're using design patterns. In the environment to hint about the puzzle, about how to solve the puzzles. So some of the things that they did were, like, you saw the orbs floating up in the air that were pretty high up, so that tells me that there's some way of getting up there. So then that says maybe I should try to figure out how to get up there, because there's something I can get from it. The walls that could be bashed were a certain design to say, hey, so I can switch the hammer to bash this wall, or this. And those tended to be more, they kind of broken. They looked broken. They looked like they would break if you touched them or hit them hard enough. They looked like they would. So then let's switch to the hammer and break it. Versus this is something that looks like I can levitate it and do something with it. versus so forth. This looks like something that I can shoot my grappling hook to so that I can move up higher. They had certain design patterns that they used to help you to hint. And so you want to pay attention to those consistent design patterns to help you, help people get through your experiences. Like there were piles of those crates, and we knew that the dude worked with boxes. So, okay, so let's switch to the wizard, the wizard, and he's gonna be able to use these somehow. What were some other good things? If y'all can think of anything, if you're watching this later on demand, or if you're watching now, can feel free to add to it. And I'm sorry, I just got a text. I have to step away for 1 second. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. What were some other good things about the game? Oh yeah, the reminders. So if no activity, so after a certain amount of no activity, a hint will show. And this is one of the things that I mentioned in, I think it's memory cues and tooltips. I think it's in that article. After a certain amount of time of consider doing this in your games. After a certain amount of time of no activity, show some kind of hint to help them know what they're supposed to be doing to complete the objective that they're on, if you know that they're on an objective. This is a good practice to help people continue, but I also like how they did it in a way that didn't break immersion. They made it a part of the story. Instead of without breaking that narrative dream. And what I mean by narrative dream is when you are in a story, when you're in an immersive experience, your mind is taken elsewhere. When you're reading a book, anything, well, your mind is taken elsewhere. And this comes from writing, from writing. This concept of the narrative dream, that if something happens, if the author wrote something a certain way, or if some kind of loud noise outside of, in reality, happens outside of that, it can break that narrative dream that you're in, that other world. It brings you back to reality. And we want to minimize that when it's not necessary to bring you back to reality. Try not to do that, because that's all part of that immersion. You want to avoid breaking that immersion, especially in VR. So how can you do that? How can you remind them of things? How can you create these experiences that show these tooltips or remind them how to do something or what their objective is without breaking that immersion? And let me just add that word, immersion. Because nobody else besides me knows what a narrative dream is, I don't think. I don't know. Maybe they do. It's a term that I came up with at some point. I don't know. I don't know where I found it. I thought I got it from Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird, which is a very good book. I'll include it. It is about writing, creative writing. I'll include it in the links. It's a very good book about creative writing. That's also very useful for game design. So she has some more books that she's come out with since then, I think, that I haven't read. But that was one of the textbooks that I had in college that I still have somewhere. So now some Thorns. What were some things that didn't go well? What were some low points? What did I not like? So one of the things was there's no manual progression of dialogue. And you want to allow manual progression of dialogue for multiple reasons. And subtitles don't show automatically. I'm going to add no option for manual progression of dialogue. Subtitles don't show automatically. Not enough memory cue, not enough tooltips of like what the actual keyboard controller I don't like it when it like breaks in the middle of the word on Nero button. It just says to use, it just says to do a thing, but it doesn't say what button does that, like use. Like that. Doesn't say how and which. Combo or sequence, because that one had a sequence. So show the sequence. What is it? What am I supposed to do here? It did it sometimes, but not always. I don't have a horrible amount of thorns on this one because it's a good game. It's well designed. What was another thorn? Environmental design, motion sickness. Oh, that was another thing. That was a Rose. Was they at least it seems like camera is on a lazy follow with the character. So much less risk of motion sickness. Okay, and some other thorns. I can't think of a ton, so I guess that will be all of our thorns because I can't remember any. Was there something else I was complaining about? I don't remember there being anything else I was complaining about during the play. So there was a lot of good. Oh, controllers. That was it. Let's see. Not enough controller type options. Only Xbox. But even with that, so if using the Xbox option, still have to manually map the buttons for the Sony controller. But the I'm thinking, sorry, I'm thinking of how to say this. So I still had to manually map the buttons for Sony. But when I went to play with it, I thought I had the buttons right, but when I went to play it, they did not work at all. It was unplayable. Because of the separation of that key binding setting from the game, I had to remember. So not remembering context of the actions means that results, I guess, results in very it results in an unusable, not remembering the context of the actions that went with each of the buttons. So I'm just thinking, okay, this is grab, this is jump, this is move, this is shoot, this is this kind of ability. The arrow versus the grappling was the major problem. Mapping them wrong. When I mapped them to the controller, it became unnatural because I wasn't thinking in context of use. But then when I went to try it, it was unusable. But then, and I didn't demonstrate that. Maybe I could try to demonstrate that real quick, but it's unusable controller interactions. I got tired of it and just stopped messing with it and went back to keyboard. So let me see if I can demonstrate it real quick. So let's see, settings. Can you see it? Why can't you see it? Okay, now you can. Configure controls. Because, so, this is where it is. And so I have the D-pad for moving. It's not the joysticks, it's the D-pad. And here's another problem, is that AB, I'm on a Sony, so I don't have AB. I have circles, I have shapes. So I don't know what these are. And I don't even understand what this means. Add clear. Okay. So that's not the stick, that's the bumper that I just hit. That's a completely different meaning. Gameplay menu should be, yeah, so I hit the options button, which means start on the Xbox. So there's this cognitive load going on because I'm having to figure out what is the controller button for the Xbox versus the Sony. Again, I don't have an Xbox controller. I don't want to buy an Xbox controller just to learn it. There should be an option for a Sony controller. And so then when I get to the actual so trigger, right trigger, left trigger. Why would there be an alternate levitate? I don't understand why there would be an alternate levitate. Magnetize. What's magnetize? I don't remember what magnetize is. X. I don't know what the X is because I have an X, but that's not going to be what this X is. Okay, it's the square. So this trying to figure out what does each do. I don't even want to mess with it because now I can't try it to go see, does this even work? Is this even going to be usable when I play? Why? I'm assuming that's this triangle. Yes, that's the triangle. And why is there a stick press? I hate the interactions that are stick press because physically those are more cumbersome. So I would recommend not doing a stick press on anything in VR because it's just going to increase the risk of error. Because when you press on a joystick, it's going to end up accidentally moving the joystick as well. So then you're going to have some accidental interactions happening. And you don't want that. So you want to prevent that. That's where back to error prevention and recovery is try to create these interactions in a way that is going to be easy and reduces the risk of accidental clicks, accidental interactions. And so the low gravity arrow, I don't remember which one that was. And I don't know why there's an alternate button for it either. So then I'm thinking I know which button would work, but then when I go to actually try to play it, it's not usable at all. So that's the problem. And because I'm trying to translate here what is Xbox on my Sony, and then thinking, okay, maybe this is going to work, but then when I go to actually do it, it's not working. And so that's why I just stopped messing with the controllers and went back to keyboard and mouse, because even the keyboard and mouse is easier than that, even though I'm not good. It just wasn't usable. So yeah. So that's what that's about. So let me get back in the browser. Okay. So that's what I meant by that. It just became unusable, and I didn't have the patience to try to translate it to figure it out. So that's why I switched to keyboard. And so now what can we do? What are some opportunities? What can we do to improve this? Add the option for manual progression. And what I would say is default it to on. And give the option to change to auto. That way, that is going to result in the least amount of error, the least amount of resistance, people missing important things. especially in VR. If you just set it to this setting, and then they can change it if they want. And a lot of games do this, and I appreciate it when they do that. Just let them have the option to change to auto progress. Let them choose. And it can be contextual in there with it as it's going, so they don't have to go change it in a settings menu. Give them the option there in context. Here, I'll add that in context. So at the time, without having to go to a menu. And so ideally you want each thorn to have at least one bud, so that you're addressing all of the things. And again, the buds aren't, they're not, this one is kind of prescriptive, but sometimes you're gonna, if it's a best practice, then make it prescriptive. But other times you're gonna like have to figure it out. So then the next step would be figure it out, explore ways. We might see something here. I don't know. I think these are all just best practices, so they're gonna have a prescriptive next step. So subtitles don't show automatically. So for that, I would say again, default, because there was an option to do it. Default subtitles on. And that's going to, again, work with that manual progression thing. Manual progression of dialogue. It ties in. Those two tie in together. With the option in context to turn them off. So that they don't have to go dig in a menu to deal with that. And these two things tie together because you want to accompany audio with text. This is a best practice, that you want to accompany audio with text. Let's see, where did I write that in any of my stuff? I'm trying to remember if I did. I think I may have. It may be in the training one. But I mean, it's a general best practice. I'm writing down what to include in the show notes later. So always include accompany. Voiceover with text. For multiple reasons, including accessibility. Okay, so not enough tooltips of what the keyboard or controller to use. And I've got these two together because it's the same. So I'm just putting things together in context. You'll see that the separate issues are separate, and I should visually separate them more than they are right now. Here. So that they are more visually separated here, so it's more clear. So these were the same thought. These were the same thought. So they're separate visually. Okay. So not enough tooltips of what keyboard or controller button to use. For example, use lever doesn't say how or which button, comma, or sequence. So And that's, again, memory cues and tooltips and training in XR also both mention this. So it seems like training in XR wouldn't be relevant to study or read if you're not creating a training simulation, but it actually does have a lot of valuable information for onboarding games that you want to learn the best practices of. So even if you're not creating a training sim, you are training them how to use your game. So maybe I should consider renaming that article. I'll write that down. Okay, so. Oh, and typo. Sorry, not enough tooltips of what keyboard or controller to use. So show tooltips in context when needed. Include the button or include the button needed to perform the action in the tooltip somehow. And I'm not saying specifically how. There are multiple ways to do it. You could do it visually. You could do it with words like they were doing. There are multiple ways to do it. I would say that the path of least resistance is a combination of both visual and text to make it that much more clear. And there are excellent ways of doing that in XR. Showing the controllers and the tooltips if you've ever played the game. First Steps, the Oculus onboarding, you'll see that they have the controllers ghosted in your hands and it shows which button to use. It highlights it and it tells you, and it has a tooltip coming from it. So it's got all of these things in combination to show you which button to use, because people are generally not used to those controllers when they first get it. And this is one of the onboarding tutorials for Oculus. So teaching you how to use the controllers and what button does what. And then that consistency, that was another thing about consistency across. One of the best practices of gaming is having consistency of buttons across games based on the platform and based on regional settings for the platform. Those things help reduce cognitive load and physical load, physical cumbersome nature of the game. They're all good best practices to keep in mind. So not enough control type options, only Xbox. So I would say add more controller types. Give options for main controller types for the major players. That could be wrong, so don't use that word. For the major types, Sony, Xbox, and Nintendo. For a 2D game. Now, if you were doing VR, it would be the same thing. One of the big problems that I have with VR is PC-based VR is that I have a Cosmos, a Vive Cosmos. And the controllers on the Vive Cosmos are more like the Quest controllers, only twice as big. At least twice as big. Whereas the Vive is a wand, which is completely different. And so all of the games, all the VR games, have mapped everything to the Vive wand and not the Vive Cosmos. So when I go into a VR game to play it on my Cosmos, it has the wand controller settings. And sometimes it renders the game completely unusable because it won't even recognize the Cosmos controller, so I can't even use it. So sometimes I can go into Steam, if it's a Steam game, I can go into Steam. I guess that's the only thing I can really do with it. I haven't really tried Vive for it. I usually just use Steam because you can use it across multiple VR headsets without having to deal with that whole platform, having to buy things across different platforms. If I just buy it on Steam, I can just play it with any headset. But sometimes I can go into Steam and I can get somebody has made some kind of custom controller mapping, what I was trying to do in Trine, but I didn't have the patience to do it because it's out of context and you'd have to go back and forth and try it and mess with it, and I'd just rather play with it on the keyboard at that point. Or not play it at all, depending on the game. But sometimes I can get a controller mapping for the Cosmos, but most the time I can't. So like Alt Space defaulted to the wand controller, whereas I had the Cosmos. So whenever I'd go into the game, I couldn't do anything. I could not do anything at all. I couldn't log in. I couldn't. Anytime I tried to press a button, even though it was the same like trigger button that you would use on the Vive wand, it would not register at all. So it was completely unusable. And then I found out that I could go find the other players in the community having the same problem because I was Googling it, trying to figure out how do I solve this problem. Some of the players in the community have created mappings, custom mappings for the Cosmos, but they haven't done that for every game. And so a lot of games are unplayable, but I won't find out until after I buy it that this is the case, unless there's, of course, a free demo. And I don't always have the patience to go in and deal with that, so I might return the game if it's one I pay for. Some games are free to play, some games have free demos, so I can download the free demo and make sure before I buy it whether or not I can even play it because of motion sickness and because of controller mapping. So you want to pay attention to your controller mapping and give people options. This goes back to flexibility. Not all of your target audience is going to have the same controller type, so give them options so that they can play your game and enjoy it without a lot of extra effort, because it's not their job to make that effort. It's ours as the creators of the game. So give the options for the major types, and then if using Xbox options, still have to manually map the buttons for Sony. So not remembering the context of the actions results in unusable controller interactions. So this one will help. Just give the options already. And then, but there's also another one. So even if you do have the right controllers, sometimes you need to do your key bindings differently because of accessibility issues. So explore. This is one's not as prescriptive. So explore ways to let people see how interactions behave in context to the key bindings settings page. And I have seen ways other people have done it. They would just show previews of what's gonna happen. That's a great solution. So I can say e.g. potential solution, potential to show preview of what would happen. That in itself is a great option. But explore different ways, because there may be something better that works better within the technical limitations of your game. Because especially if you're retrofitting a game, and that's what has happened here, which is probably one of the reasons that they only went with one controller. Because I think that this was retrofitted for Steam after the game had already been made. Maybe. I could be wrong. But it's going to be a lot more technically difficult to do these things. So it's easy for us as players to say, why didn't you just do this? This is common sense. Like we were saying earlier, a lot of that comes down to not everything. First of all, not everything may be possible because of technical limitations. Based on they would end up having to recode the whole thing, which isn't worth it at that point if they're just retrofitting it, or that they didn't do research, and so things that we think are obvious aren't necessarily obvious. Because you've got so much stuff going on, you're going to miss stuff. And so that's where usability testing, user research comes in, is helping to find those things. UX comes in there, and that's a huge benefit of UX. So then now